Welcome to the Transformative Principal podcast. This is your host, Eric McKelkey, and today our guest on the show is Mr. Chad Lang. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Chad's joining us from Glenwood, Iowa. He's currently an assistant superintendent of HR and school improvement. He's got his own podcast titled Learning with Interesting People and a book coming out fall of 23. Chad, is that right?
That's correct. Yep. TBA, fall of 2023. Roman and Littlefield is the publisher, and then we're shooting for early to mid fall at this time.
Yeah, the title of the book, Being Clear About What Matters, A Parent's Guide to Grading and Reporting. So Chad, you've got a real strong background when it comes to curriculum, grading, feedback. I wanted to start the conversation today with curriculum. I don't know if it's safe to assume, but I'm going to assume most principals, curriculum's not their favorite thing. But it's one of those things we know is important. We have to do it. It's never ending. So how would you frame the importance of curriculum for building principals, Chad?
Well, I agree with you. And I think it varies depending on the background of the candidate. Some principals have, been a department chair or been involved in some school leadership, teacher leadership prior to their transition in administration. And so, it really varies on their background. I think it varies on their school system and maybe what professional learning they've really had in their background. So it's an easier lift for them. And then just organizationally, systematically, what's their school organization like? I've been in taught in high schools with almost 2,000 students, and I've also been an assistant principal of a school with 200. So everywhere in between, really, your experience kind of dictates that, I think to a degree, in every facet really of our leadership. But also, systematically, how do districts approach state standards or national standards in terms of their resources? I think that's always a big challenge for school leaders, is navigating the difference between resources and curriculum.
What
Most people go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I was gonna pause because that one is important. How would you define the difference between curriculum and resources?
Yep. The difference between curriculum and resources is the curriculum is the localized version, or even the state version, but a localized version of standards that are prioritized in a way to make sure they're guaranteed and viable for all of your students. The resources are what we use to help us teach and assess the learning standards or the targets. So oftentimes, if you ask teachers or even administrators, what's your curriculum for math? They'll say a company's name. That's not a curriculum. That's a resource. That's a resource that's utilized. And there is no resource that can fully teach all of your localized targets and standards. It's impossible. There's not a company for every single school in America. So it's faulty to presume that a resource could be a curriculum. It's just not possible. There are some really good ones out there. There's some really good car companies, but not all cars are made for all roads. So you have to have a process to assess the tools that you have. Sometimes budgeting plays a huge role, time, systems. But I think it's important to understand that your resources that you have access to, or a district or a school community, are not the curriculum, and the standards are not a curriculum. If you have state or not, as a matter of fact, if you read the first page of most of those documents, and so you have to have some sort of system. Very important. Nothing's important, and to prioritize.
Yeah, I hear that one a lot, where you ask people what their curriculum looks like, and they give you the name of the textbook, and I'm not sure where that comes from. Maybe that was the thinking once upon a time, but I would agree. I mean, there's no way that a textbook company from Texas or California is going to meet the needs of your local district and your students and what you prioritize. And I think that's important because I know there are districts out there and schools out there that they do buy a textbook and they do follow it, page 1 to page 500, but we can certainly do better than that. And we should be doing better than that. Where would you recommend principals start if they're new coming into the building or new to the district? Curriculum's usually not one of the top fires burning that gets put on your plate as a building administrator, but where would you recommend they start?
I think it depends on what time of year is it? Do you have an opportunity to come in, early summer or midsummer, or if that's not the case, or you're kind of diving in with your teachers in the fall? Let's just think about that. Number one. Number two, I'd be sure as heck to have some good conversations about what our overall district mission and vision are about learning. Just listening to you say that, saying, that's not one of your top missions to really prioritize. What is then? Student learning is ultimately what we're here for. And so there's a lot of other things, school safety and culture and all those types of things that understand that. And as a HR director, principal, so don't get me wrong, but we can synthesize down what our priorities are. Like, what do we actually want to make sure when they walk across that stage someday represent, and what they can know or do, and kind of crystallize that down. That will really help drive some of the decision making that you'll do. So where do you find that information out? Well, you might not have that information. Placards on the wall can collect that quick, missions and visions, and even websites now. The question is, mean. So, who are your stakeholders that you're talking to? Is it the board? Is it your superintendent? Other central office personnel? And I think one of the questions I would start with is, what is preventing us from being able to know, or is that our students can go? What are the skills or content that are learning them? And you may not know. It might be multiple things. It might be technology. And where can I try to learn more about where we can lever those things up within our current district? I would want to meet with either departments or lead teams or building teams. Or talk to me a little bit about curriculum. What does that mean to you? Hopefully, a theme of our conversation, Eric, is let's ask more questions than tell, especially when I'm a new administrator. Ask tons of questions, not in um, a way that's in an interrogation, but really more of a way of help me paint the picture, help me understand. Gaining context is really important for me. Context is super low in my strength set. If you have any familiarity with Clifton's strengths. So that's something I have to be extremely cognizant of when it comes to curriculum is when I go to a school organization, our teachers can't apologize. They shouldn't have to apologize to me where they're at because they're in there. It is what it is. That they are where they are for basically no fault of their own. This is the system that it's created. So if I come in asking questions like, "You mean you don't do formative assessment?" That's really just telling them you should be doing that. That's not really asking them why. So focusing on context with asking a lot of questions to bring clarity is super important. And obviously, I'm sure a number of new principals to a school are meeting one-on-one with a lot of staff and just trying to build relationships. And I think that would be a great time to do that. Maybe categorize your one-on-ones, a little bit about building management, a little bit about context and history, a little bit about their personal lives, and then obviously talk to me about your curriculum. What are your goals for our kids? Where do they struggle? And then take good notes and look for themes.
Yeah, it's hard to know where you're going if you don't even know where you are. And curriculum to me is one of those that
Mhm.
it's going to take some time and some digging and, like you said, a lot of questions. Another hot topic that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is grading. Um,
Sure.
it kind of goes hand in hand with curriculum, but looking school wide or district wide, what do you think grading should look like?
Well, I think you need to 1996 book by Sue Brookhart. Look at 25 years younger, but usually it came from more than one time. And most of us would agree that the ethical thing for grades to do is to report what a student can know or do up against standards. And anything else that would be included in that would be not above our pay grade. Like I can report things to you, but to actually calculate them and report them is in a false metric is above our pay grade. That's not something we should be doing. And so that's really where I just always go back to is what is your primary purpose of grading? And if we can agree that the purpose is to communicate an individual's alignment to what they can know or do of a learning target, standards, or contents even, then that's exactly what we should do. Nothing more, nothing less. And there's a lot of other things that I can teach your child that we're responsible for, that we can hang our hat on, that we can communicate to parents. But there's all kinds of false metrics, and we've made things way more complicated than what they need to be. And they've diluted grades. I mean, there's just oodles and oodles of research out there about the dangers of points and percentages. And it's actual research. It's not a hunch. It's not a feeling. It's actual research that shows the great inflation that has gone on in our country over the years. Not that long ago in 1980s, I was brought up to be told that a C was average and that was actually good. Okay. That
Hmm.
was actually a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. And now, if someone comes home with a C on a grade, even if it's calculated with the best intention, somebody did something wrong typically, and usually it's the teacher that gets the blame. So if you disagree with that statement, then you probably don't think grading's a problem. But if you agree that, yeah, that's probably true, what he's saying, I wouldn't be okay with a C if I was a parent, then you know our scale is broken because a C is supposed to be
I like that starting point, Chad, because I think unless you have that conversation about what grades mean, you're in different places. And part of
Mhm.
that that I've seen is, including things like participation, attendance, behavior, extra credit. I think if you can come to a common understanding of what a grade means, those different things answer themselves unless you've got a standard that includes, behavior
Correct.
or attendance. It really should not be part of the grade.
Correct.
Um,
And all of those things are important. See, that's what gets mixed up in grading conversations is people start to play the card of, well, it's a trophy for every kid. We don't hold people accountable anymore. Actually, it's quite the contrary. All of those things are still highly expected to be done, meeting deadlines. It's just that you don't calculate that misperformance in with an academic grade. It's too important to do that. So we can communicate all of those things separately. They just need to be communicated separately. Um, you could make a portion of your grade, but it should be negligible to the standards, unless, like you said, you actually had a standard in your school that said respect or something like that, or meet deadlines with an actual academic standard you report a grade on. You could do that. I don't
yeah.
know any state that gives credit for that, but you most certainly could do that. But all of those other things are important. I would disagree with extra credit being important because we just need to emphasize the regular credit first, because methodologically that's completely inaccurate to do. You're saying that doing X can replace Y, and most people that are in favor of that would say, well, in the real world, no, in the real world, you can't bring your boss a cupcake because you missed the architectural plans that were due on Friday. You can't do that. You'll be fired. In the real world, if you want to get a bonus as an architect, you produce the very best architectural plans possible to win bids, and you don't try to do arbitrary worksheets of renderings that. So really, for almost all of those types of things that we have traditionally thrown in, they're really just trying to live off power. I mean, some of it's a power move. I'm going to manipulate students into things by withholding things or having consequences related to behavior. That's great. You should do that, but it shouldn't be calculated in an academic grade.
Yeah, and it should be upfront and clearly articulated so that students know what that is. One that comes up a lot, just looking at the difference between generations when it comes to grading philosophy
Mhm.
is the zero. I've been in a school before that did not enter zeros for students when they failed to complete or turn in assignments, and parents really struggle with that. How is my kid not getting a zero? I want them held accountable. What do you think the power of the zero is, and what should it be when it comes to grading?
For bringing that. Um, so first of all, mathematically a disaster if you use points and percentages in average. a grade. It's absolutely disastrous. It can take, depending on um, how your grade books are set up, it could take 100% to negate the effect of 1 0. Getting a fact on people that get more than one, it's almost irrecoverable. And the fact of the matter is um, not completing one assignment is, you'd be hard pressed to argue that one assignment is the make or break learning practice that has to be done, because actually practice differs based off people's learning. I mean, we all learn different ways. So I don't know how many different practices one person would need. It depends, actually. So one of the ironies of education today is that we push differentiation, try to the needs of our students. We have to differentiate within our lesson, but we never differentiate homework. So you can't be confident that any one practice is the holy grail. That's probably faulty. We don't probably vet our practice that of all that said they want their child to get a 0. Well, we can still hold them accountable, but you should have a behavioral consequence for a behavior problem, an academic consequence for an academic problem. There's all kinds of methodological flaws with giving someone a 0. And the other thing that really what it boils down to for giving zeros is for teachers that have done that hundreds, really almost 100 years now or 50 years, how's that going? Is that getting a lot of assignments turned in? And is that really increasing the learning of our students? I mean, sure, it'll work for a few students whose parents are really on it, but at the end of the day, there is no research to support that giving a child a 0 increases their ability to learn. It just doesn't, and it certainly doesn't improve their motivation. My co-author, Matt Townsley, says, can you think of a student who in 10th grade that you went to school with didn't turn in assignments? Oh yeah, we all can, right? Maybe it's even
Mhm.
us. And then he always asks the second question. Did you go to school in 8th grade with that student? Yeah, I did. Did he or she turn in assignments in 8th grade? Well, no. What about 6th? No, not really. And so zeros didn't really work for them, did it? And the question is it's not whether or not they should be held accountable. And oftentimes I hear people say, well, you shouldn't get anything for when you don't do anything. It's not about getting anything, because we don't do learning practice to get something. It's not a transaction. It's to learn. It's actually practice. And so you shouldn't be withheld the opportunity to demonstrate what you can know or do because you chose not to do it. But certainly, if you want to have an accountability behavior consequence, I'm all for that. I think we should do that. But academic consequences for academic miscues and interventions, behavior consequences for behavior miscues. And you very easily can have systems in place to take care of that. And sometimes people will argue, well, that's not the real world, but it really is. It really is, and there's lots and lots of examples for how it actually is. Um, and again, I don't believe anybody should be getting credit for doing nothing. Um, but those are how those. I just think you should treat academics as academics and behavioral as behavioral.
Yeah. Well, that analogy of the real world, I think it's important to remind ourselves, the purpose of education is to get them ready for the real world, but we can't treat them the
Correct.
same way because my go-to is, there's a lot of things you would do in the workplace, or an institution of higher learning that would get you fired. But when you're a K-12 student in a public school, we can't fire you. So
Mm-hmm.
we got to
Yeah.
be careful with the people that like to say, well, let's get them ready for the real world. Yes, but we can't fire students. So why do you
Yeah.
think why do you think there's such a fear for the schools that are still holding on to that 0?
Mhm.
What's holding them back? Because it's not working. It's not motivating.
Mhm.
And as a teacher, I mean, you don't want students to not turn in work because you don't know if they learned anything. If the point of teaching is to see learning, I don't know what you learned if you don't do your work. So what's holding us back?
Yeah, I think what's holding people back is the electronic grade book to some degree. There's a great article out there by Douglas Reeves and also Tom Guskey on kind of demystifying the electronic grade book. It's caused more harm than good. It's certainly there's some great reading out there that people should do on the difference between precision and accuracy. Electronic grade books are extremely precise, but they're also wildly decides it's put input. You can calculate a student's average out to the millionth place, and that will make it extremely precise.
I think some of that is really a power thing where we we want to make it heard, or we think it's motivating, well, I want the parents to see a zero in order to get the kid to change their behavior,
Mhm.
which really doesn't have anything to do with learning. um,
Whenever I work with teachers, Eric, that say that, I said, if you want the parent to notice it, just call them. Just call them. I mean, why do we have to use, just call them. When I was a head basketball coach, I didn't wait until the players shot 21% from free throws to call their parents and why they weren't playing. I just called them and said, listen, they're really struggling. They're not coming to practice. When they come to practice, they're not focused. I just want you to know, I know you really love basketball, and that they're not going to probably play very much because what I'm seeing in practice, the homework, the evidence, is not matching what we need to see in games. And I'm not going to let them fail in the game and hurt themselves and hurt their parents and our team. But if you really want to communicate to someone, just do it. Just be clear. Second conversation. Not give them a zero, because what I've seen 100 times, and I'm sure you have too, is the alternate true. 0, 0, 0, 0. Kids did reading assignment. They have to blah blah. Parent calls are really upset because their kid's upset because they didn't get to do the rocket with all the other eighth graders. Now they don't feel cool. Blah blah blah. Whatever it is, and all of that could have been prevented with better communication up front. And all
yeah.
of it was, we value the same thing. So I think that's something you have to think about too. Do you have a reason? Do you have a motivational reason that a child would want to complete the task that you're asking them to do in the classroom? Because if it's the same thing every day, like I had growing up, 1 through 51 odd in math, I I can't see how you've put a lot of effort into the type of practice that you're giving me in the I mean, kids do dumb things, but they're not dumb. That's what I always say. And so after a while, how would you want to be as an adult? Would you like that as an adult? The same thing over and over again. And the results for me, they're about the same, regardless of the practice that we do day in and day out. So, um, and I think the other thing too that complicates grading is that, most teachers were really good at the game of school. So they know how to navigate
Yeah.
it. They were internally motivated. They colored inside the lines. They got all their spelling words right. And so they see school with rose colored glasses. They're like, I don't know why anyone else couldn't do this. I did it really, really well. And so, I heard that from someone this year, and I thought, what a great concept of bias. How biased are we? Sure, there are exceptions to the rule, but most people were really good at school and they become teachers. And so they just see, like, this wasn't that hard. And that's where you get into all kinds of equity issues as well. You just don't know where students are coming from and their backgrounds and how their families see school and how we can support learning. And I think we just write off and assume so much. Well, you ought to be motivated. Wouldn't you be just sick if you got a zero? No, no. I would be, but but most people don't become teachers, you see. So we maybe have a more narrow lens than a wide one.
Yeah, I think that's a huge challenge because all the things that students struggle with in school, most teachers can't really empathize with because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you and I must have had the same math teacher growing up, but he thought 1 through 51 odds was fun. I mean, he looked forward
Right,
to that. And why would no one want to go home and do one through
right.
51 odds? And it's
Well,
hard to relate. You got to remind yourself that, they're not like you were when you were a student. And a lot of what we do, I think we just make that assumption that they look at school the way I looked at school.
well, that's 100% true. And I think here's the other thing. When I was in that math class in seventh grade math or sixth grade math or whatever it was, there weren't standards. There weren't expectations. There were expectations from our local school board to prepare people for whatever the rigors were outside of the four walls of high school. But there weren't standards or statewide national testing where schools were targeted and had statuses and things like that. The rigor was, we did a study of a university placement math practice booklet from like the 1960s. This is a Division I institution. I'm not going to say the name of it. Doesn't matter. And we looked at the math that they said, you study this book, you be prepared to get into this university. And we did a crosswalk to our curriculum in 2021. It was third grade. It was third grade math in the 1960s to get into this university. And I'm not going to say the name because I'm not going to make a joke about it, but it wouldn't matter. It'd be all the same. Not all of it was third grade, but a lot of it was for us. So you think about the rigor change and what we ask students to do. That's not a cop out. It really is. Otherwise, we wouldn't have shows called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader and all those things. And I hear from parents all the time. I can't help them with any of this stuff anymore. And it's usually in elementary school. And that's real. That's not insulting. I mean, they are cognitively well able to do it they just don't always know the tips or tricks or the vocab or those kinds of things. And that would be fair of any of us who haven't done anything for 30 or 40 years. But it is cognitively more complex. There is more rigor. And so the way we teach and practice has to be different. It has to be different. If I did 1 through 51 odd and skipped every other assignment in the 1990s or 80s, I actually was probably fine. I mean, really, truly, if I would have got a D plus in the class, whatever it was, it wouldn't have mattered because I would have garnered enough math. I just didn't do it in the way that that individual wanted it to look. But I would have garnered some math through that way. But why should you have to do that? I mean, wouldn't you want to appeal to someone's growth mindset, have them actually see what they could be good at instead of just trudging them through the conveyor belt? Most people have seen the clip of I Love Lucy where she's putting the chocolates in her dress and she can't keep up with them. School doesn't have to be like that, and it shouldn't be like that because we don't live in a content. We're not in a knowledge economy anymore. I mean, think of Chat GPT. I mean, think of Google. Like you are not valued for what you know. As Flippin says, content is commoditized. There's 10 million people on YouTube that can explain something better than I can right now. So my value as a teacher and as a school has changed. Now I still have extremely high value on those people that can apply the learning to your life and how we do that and teach collaboration and cooperation and working together and problem solving and critical thinking. But that content, you are not the master of content anymore to a large degree, especially secondarily. Yes, a kindergartner can't go on and teach themselves phonics probably very easily. But I used to be a history teacher, Eric. I mean, I thought I was the conduit of all learning when it came to the Civil War, American government, and surely I'm not. And that was 20 years ago. But think about it now. So we have a different role, a different responsibility. And so that makes those poor grading practices even more harmful because there is no magical assignment that you are going to assign that is going to say, yes, if you don't do the section review on worldwide expansion during the 1900s in these 6 questions from the back of the book, you will not understand alliances when it comes to World War One. That's completely crazy. Because seriously, on Siri, they go, "Hey Siri, what's alliances?" I mean, and you could get a better definition. You get better than reading it. And it doesn't mean that they're lazy. It doesn't. I mean, it goes back to that real world example. I see people doing that all the time. They're like, "Well, it was the same argument about typewriters and about TI-83 calculators and all those kinds of things." And we criticize students from doing it. And then you walk right out of the school into the grocery store or the gas station. And I see people using GPS to get around town that they should know how to get around. I see people asking Siri ridiculous things that they should know, right? Like, hey, is there more gallons and cups, and things like that? Like I'll hear them asking this little electronic device on their kitchen sink, and they're adults. And so it's like utilizing that type of technology or utilizing your resources is only reserved for when you've made it through this rite of passage of this antiquated conveyor belt system of school. And we're missing an opportunity if we don't really realize that. And I think once you think about how when you're grading some antiquated practices, just how damaging that can be to someone's, their GPA, their motivation, perhaps, or even just their love for learning.
Yeah, it can have a big
What
impact.
we're seeing is that it really when you take points off for everything or zeros, you decrease their ability to want to fail. Listen to what I'm saying is like to actually take a risk and innovate and try to put more weight on the scale to build the bridge stronger, try a different trestle design or whatever. If you knew you had one shot to do that assignment, that decreases innovation, creativity, which is exactly what we need in 2022, 2023 and beyond, because you could lose a point, you could miss something, and of course it increases cheating. So
Yeah.
that's why people are really worried about Chat GPT and AI and all these kinds of things. And the question shouldn't be, yeah, I would be worried too, but, 'cause, 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 I there are ways to ask your students or work with your students to problem solve that they don't have to be on a computer. So, I mean, that would be my first step is, well, have we worked out a problem? Did you know that ChatGPT can write a whole code? Yeah, I do know that. And I don't even know all it can do. Did you know it could write a whole essay? Yeah, I see that. I've even tried it. But I kind of just sit down with a half piece of paper and say, can we write a thesis statement together? Is that still okay to do? Sorry, I got off on a tangent on that. I apologize, but I
No.
see it all as a circular issue, you know, and so grading just flows right in that. But it's really about teaching and learning. It's really about meeting the needs of our economy and the type of critical thinking and skills our kids are going to need to have. And I think sometimes we're just fearful as adults because we're like, I don't know how to operate in that world. It's moved too fast. I can't control it, right? So you just cling on to what you know.
Yeah, and
And grading's a big part of that.
talking the real world, I think we as educators talk about it all the time, but I would also argue we're one of the only professions we don't live in the real world. We live in school. And school is not the real world. So unless
Oh,
you've
great point.
unless you've been in another career, but those of us that went from high school to college to the classroom, it's like, do you really know how the real
Mm-hmm.
world works? Maybe your spouse
Mm-hmm.
does, but a lot of us
Yeah,
have never been in it. And grading, you know, in public education looks very different than, grading or evaluations in probably any other career field.
agreed.
Yeah.
Probably. I don't know because I've been in education my whole life, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I've just only been fortunate enough to be friends with lots of people that don't work in education. And so I ask them lots of questions about their job and about how they get evaluated and how they get feedback and, do they get fired when they, forget to meet the first deadline and things like that. And you know what? They don't. They're all gainfully employed. They've all made mistakes. As a matter of fact, because of the mistakes, they've gotten even better at what they do because they got feedback. They didn't get a slap on the hand that says you lose $13.82 because of some arbitrary number.
Mhm.
They said, I'm really disappointed that you didn't ask me questions before we had this big presentation. I don't want that to happen again. What can I do to help you? And they got better
Yeah. Yeah.
or, whatever it was in their job. I've got some friends that work in banking. So like they were always doing really big time presentations, for example. And those are the things they share with me. Now, I'm sure there's exceptions to lots and lots of rules, and I'm obviously not advocating people get paid when they're not there, that type of thing.
Yeah, or allowed to repeatedly miss deadlines, but
Yep.
they're not afraid of, if I take a risk, I might lose 5 points on the rubric. Um, that's probably not how they operate. Um,
Well, and the flip side of that's true. You're not doing any leveled increase of quality because of the 5 points.
yeah,
That's those people that produce at the top level where you're like, this is better than I could have ever imagined. I'm so thrilled by your performance. It wasn't extrinsic. That was the deal. It wasn't the big bonus. It was having a knack for quality, having a knack for making people happy, being internally satisfied, that internal and intrinsic motivation. I mean, and the extrinsic will come. The financial ramifications will come, and they always do. I think there are people that are driven by those metrics, but largely it's never sustainable. So um, you can't fake it. It's just authenticity of high quality and wanting to do the right thing always seem to take precedent. And
yeah,
again, like you said, Eric, we're kind of we know our field, but I think most people would find that to be true in their fields as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, Chad, tell the listeners what's the best way to get in touch with you if they have questions or want to chat.
Best way to get in touch with me is on Twitter, honestly, at Chad CHAD underscore lowercase m capital Lang, just underscore Chad. Excuse me, Chad underscore M at Lang. That's really the best way to reach out to me. Send me a direct message. And if you want to have a conversation further about grading, assessment, school leadership, I don't have all the answers. Spent about the last 15 years of education really thinking hard about grading and assessment and reporting with parents and developing really good relationships. I take some pretty hard stances on things, but I think the important thing is to have a good dialogue and open mind about how we're doing school. It's not just grading and assessment. There's a lot of things that have evolved and changed for the better. I want to have a positive mindset about what we can do in the field of education. I'm really, really proud of the field the last few years and a lot of the difficult things that we are continuing to go through. And I think most people know that education is the backbone of our country and that they want to support it. They want to understand it. We're not the bad guys. Educators are not the bad guys. We're not the villains. If you really think about, all the people that are in education that you've come across, they're not in it to try to get rich scheme or try to make life difficult for your kids. As a matter of fact, we lose a lot of sleep at night just trying to do the very best we can. Thinking about, we talked about grading a lot on this episode. I mean, there's been tons of times where I've thought about, a mark that was wrong or not enough feedback on an essay that I gave back and that left them kind of actually losing sleep at night about things like that. And I think most educators are that way. And I'm really proud of them. I'm proud of the educators and school leaders that are out there today. We make mistakes, but man, there's really tough people that want to do right by kids, and we entrust these people every day with so much time with our kids. And I'm so grateful to be in the profession and grateful to have a lot of cool people to do the work that sometimes folks don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not getting any easier, the profession, but it's also not getting any less important.
No, I totally agree. I think more, I mean, to my point previously about technology, I think even more important. I think it's more important to be able to be a connector, be a creator, be a problem solver, and have a masterful teacher there that understands neuroscience and understands learning and understands development of kids to be able to help you navigate through that. How do you help people navigate through the fact that I can just Google something in 10 seconds and think I have the answer, but I really don't understand it? You need a teacher to do that.
Yeah.
So it's not something to be fearful of. It's something to be grateful for. And I feel like, our teachers, while there may be quite a few less in the pipeline right now, the ones that I'm interviewing are fantastic. They have a great mindset and they're really trying to take as much as they can from their undergraduate experiences and really think about how they can apply it to help kids today from all backgrounds. So it's been very rewarding. And I would encourage people to keep working and keep growing, keep learning, listening to podcasts and finding different mediums to just grow is super important. And sharing, just getting good ideas from people.
Yeah. Well, a good way to wrap that thought up, Chad, what can the listeners do this week to be a more transformative principal like you?
Yeah, ask questions. Um, try to ask and not tell. We all have really probably some strong feelings about so many different things that we do because we're passionate and we shouldn't apologize about that. And one of my own weaknesses is, or really just not a great strength of mine, is to not end up telling through however medium it comes out of my mouth usually, or even an email and I'm just telling you what to think or what I think and giving you that impression that I don't value your context or where you're coming from. And I think school leaders can do themselves a great favor just by asking lots of questions and trying to learn and get color to the situation or just the context of what's going on with our students and with our curriculum, with our grading. Tell me where you're coming from, by asking questions and being truly a good reflective listener and thinking about your body language and your digital body language. There's just some great research out there about even having your phone in your hand, not even looking at it, but when you talk to someone um, that actually sends a message that you're not connected, and so
Mhm.
just not even having your phone or your laptop or your Chromebook even present when you're talking to folks. Um, I think that'd be something I would really encourage you to do this week. Have some questions, ask some conversation with your teachers without a phone in your hand, a Chromebook out, a piece of electronic, maybe not even a notebook or a pen or a pencil, but it's truly just that true connection. You're capable of remembering a lot. I think that means a great deal to folks. We have a responsibility to be a great listener and ask questions and be present.
Great. That's great advice. Does that include walkie-talkies too for campus
Yeah,
principals?
that would include walking. It would at least squelch them down to a dull buzz. It's been a while since I've worn a walkie-talkie, but I do get to wear them on Friday night football games every once in a while in the fall. But yeah, you would want to try to take those down and maybe tell your secretary, "Hey, I'm going to shut this off for 15 minutes or something." Let people know you're off the grid, but give them the opportunity to be undivided attention.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks, Chad. Really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing some wisdom with the listeners. Thank you.
Of course, of course. It's been my pleasure. Keep doing great work out in Wyoming. And thank you for your time.